Have you guys ever seen RFK Jr. argue with a right-leaning figure? Genuine question, by the way, because he's a paid plant who exists to pull votes from Joe Biden, I guess now Kamala Harris. Yeah, they just platform him and he just complains about the Democrats.
Today, RFK Jr. held a press conference to tell Democrats, "I told you so."
A year ago, a little over a year ago, when I entered this race, I predicted that President Biden suffered from a degenerative condition that was not going to improve, and that it
as opposed to me,
would make it impossible for him to govern effectively. The reaction of the DNC to that obvious condition was to hide it from the American public and to use their power over the Democratic Party nomination process.
By the way, just to be clear, in case you have to deal with this rhetoric in the future, the Democrats didn't hide a degenerative condition. They felt like their candidate was weak in public speaking, and for that reason, they tried to keep him from public speaking. That's not hiding a medical condition from the American people. That's just basic strategy. Well, no, actually, yeah, JFK often had to wear a back brace, but I bet you they weren't telling that shit to the public. He had like severe back pain and used opioids consistently to try to deal with it. Consequence of the war. FDR was not known to be disabled, even though he had to be physically carried whenever he wasn't in a wheelchair. The few times FDR was seen publicly standing up, it was a combination of people physically moving him around, him bracing himself against like a podium or a railing in great physical pain. You know, yeah. Like none of these, well, actually, in both of those cases, I think you could make a better argument for the hiding of a physical condition from the American people. In Joe Biden's case, man was just old, you know? There's no legal obligation for the Democrats to disclose exactly how charismatic Joe Biden is at any given moment. It's not a matter of hiding stuff from the American people. I think the Democrats should have been sensible and established Joe Biden as a one-term president. If they had just accepted that he was a one-term president, we wouldn't be in this deal.
To make sure that nobody could compete with President Biden in a way that would expose his deficiencies. And as a result, we are where we are today, which is in a period of crisis.
Presidential candidate RFK Jr. joins us now. So,
dude, look at him. Oh my God. He is just a vile and repugnant man on every level. Remember how just a few weeks ago he was confronted on the air for the rape accusation, and his response was essentially, "I did it, and there might be more accusations against me in the future"? That was crazy.
RFK, you ran the right way. You did what you were supposed to do. You're a Democrat. You primaried a Democrat incumbent, and they wouldn't let you. How did they jam you out of this thing? Because now look at what happened.
Yeah, I think it was a strategic mistake by the Democrats, Jesse, and you and I have talked about this before. But they got rid of, they changed the primary rules while while we were running the primary. They changed 60 different rules to make it impossible for anybody to challenge Joe Biden. One of the things that you remember that they did to me is I've been campaigning in New Hampshire, so they adopted a rule that said that any political candidate, any Democratic candidate who campaigns in New Hampshire, who steps foot into the state of New Hampshire, that all of their votes would go to the president, all of their delegates would go to the president, instead of going...
I don't know any of the details of this. I think it's safe to, like, disregard anything he says on the basis of him being a paid plant and a liar and a rapist. I don't really care, to be honest. I will say I do agree with the accusation that the Democrats like deliberately squashed the primary this time around, and I do think that's bad. It's just these criticisms mean nothing from RFK Jr. because he's a lunatic conspiracy theorist far-right plant who was placed in the Democratic primary by Republicans to pull votes from Joe Biden, which, you know, in case you're wondering what he's up to right now, by the way, he's urging the DNC to use neutral polling to name the new presidential nominee. So RFK Jr., you know, with his massive IQ. His suggestion is, what if you chose your presidential nominee from non-Democratic Party polling, you know? What if everyone got to weigh in on that, you know? Not the DNC. What if like the Republicans got to choose your candidate? There's no possible negative incentive to that one. He's so unserious. Yeah.
That. And then they shut down the Florida primary. They shut down a bunch of primaries and just said, we're not running them. We already have our candidate. You know, a few weeks ago, President Biden was ridiculing Vladimir Putin, who won 88% of the vote in Russia, and he said, you know, that was a fixed election. Because
as evidenced by the fact that it is objectively a fixed election in a dictatorship. Also, curious to immediately, like, implicitly race to the defense of Vladimir Putin. Also, wow, look at how shit the sleeve sizing is on Joe Biden's suit right here. My God, don't ever go for like a skinny fit sleeve. It just rides up your shirt, catches at the elbow, and now you have like half a foot of shirt exposed.
President Putin had gotten
this guy's shirt isn't even showing. What the f is going on over here?
It made sure no adversaries could challenge him, and also that he had fixed the press so the press wouldn't cover his adversaries. Well,
Joe Biden did a conspiracy to prevent people from listening to this beautiful voice of mine, and it's definitely not because I have no charisma, independent poll ideas that appeal to Democrats.
Well, the Democratic Party succeeded in doing the same thing. I haven't been allowed on any of the Democratic networks, ABC, NBC, CBS.
You're not You're not obligated to if they don't want to bring you on? Why would they be obligated to bring you on? Why would they be obligated to do that?
CNN, as you know, Fox has allowed me on, although Fox.
I wonder why. What could possibly indicate the unpopularity of a presidential candidate who exclusively gets interviewed by the right wing, you know? That's very interesting. I wonder why.
People like you have allowed me to speak. You debate me. You give me a platform.
What do they debate him on? Have you guys ever seen RFK Jr. argue with a right-leaning figure? Genuine question, by the way. Have you ever seen anyone bring him on to disagree with him because he's a paid plant who exists to pull votes from Joe Biden? I guess now Kamala Harris. I've never seen him actually argue with, yeah, they just platform him and he just complains about the Democrats. That's it.
Even though you don't agree with things that I say, and I think that's the way the media is supposed to work. But
yeah,
the other media networks have forgotten about that.
When you're playing with children, you just change the rules in the middle of the game and just kind of make it up as you go along. You can't do that when it comes to these high stakes. You know how things operate at conventions. There's been a long history of chicanery at these things. You've now have uncommitted delegates. Are we going to see bribery? Are we going to see quid pro quo? Are we going to see ambassadorships promised, donors, greed?
What is this? Bosch, I agree the conspiracy theories about this being planned from the start are wrong. My friend has been nagging me about this since before the debate, and I just know she's going to be insufferable. Divini, show this clip to her. New York Times runs seemingly pre-written op-ed calling for Biden to drop out of the presidential race. The URL indicates the article was at least partially pre-written and loaded up on June 25th. I've got a crazy bit of breaking info for you. All of them are pre-written. There are people who have pre-written every possible event. Like, you have no idea. Everything that could happen, everyone with a personal grudge, everyone's waiting for the right time to pull the trigger. You think people are waiting for the news to happen before they write these op-eds? Writing takes time. You need to get it vetted afterwards? Why not just write several op-eds beforehand, have the editors check them, and then wait? You can write that shit months in advance. The idea that Joe Biden would do so poorly in his debate that he should drop out, not exactly like a crazy difficult thing to predict. We were talking about it before the debate. We were saying, wow, there's a very, very real chance Joe Biden ends up being so incompetent and old that he doesn't, it's not that difficult to predict these sorts of things, And if what you believe doesn't come to pass, you just don't release the op-ed.
You're basically, this is a sprint to grease as many delegates by mid-August as possible.
What is that breathing? Is that RFK?
I think, some of that is bound to happen.
Sounds like Darth Vader.
I think most of those delegates are kind of mom and pop people. They're committed to Biden. They committed originally to Biden. his releasing them, I think a lot of them are probably idealistic people who want to see the Democratic nominee, or terrified of Donald Trump, who want to see the Democratic nominee succeed. But I don't, the indicators now, Jesse, is that the party elites are not really going to let go of the process. And we'll see what happens. The last time, there's a lot of similarities between this election and what happened with my dad's election in 1968.
There we go. Anyone on the timer? That was 4:41 until RFK Jr. brings up his father or his uncle in any conversation ever on any subject.
There was a war
going. Oh, now they're zooming in on him now because they're like, this is what we bring him in for. The only people who care about RFK Jr. are either on the right wing or know him through name recognition. So now we're bringing him in.
Going on at that time that was very controversial and it was very damaging to our country. There were protesters in the street. The convention was in Chicago. And my father, who was leading, got knocked out by an assassin's bullet, not by a resignation. You, in effect, had an open convention, but the DNC at that time tried to maintain control over it. They put their candidate in, which was Hubert Humphrey. There was the convention became riotous, and the riots shocked the American public, and they didn't want anything to do with the Democratic Party after that. And I think a lot of people in the Democratic Party probably should look back to what happened in 1968 and
the completely incomparable situation. Gotcha. What is he talking about? Hello? Invariably every RFK Jr. video ends up doing this. It's just a matter of time, like how long they last. More of this. What's up, Tulsi? They paying you well?
Former Democratic
Remember when everyone was like, wow, she shifted to the right so rapidly and so incoherently, it's almost like after she drops out in 2020, she's immediately going to get a Fox News spot, and then she immediately got a Fox News spot. Like, the grift was so obvious and so telegraphed that it was that obvious. It was that straightforward.
Presidential candidate Tulsi Gabbard is here. Tulsi, I don't think Coons is faking it. He's been a Biden lover since the jump. Van Jones has been pushing Biden out harder than anybody. Those are crocodile tears. That guy's the best actor on CNN.
The fact that they're touting President Joe Biden making this decision as doing what's best for the country, it's just hypocrisy, given how many of them, as you mentioned, have been saying for days that he should step down as the Democratic nominee. I think the thing here to focus on, Jesse, is all of these different.
What's the hypocrisy? Did she just said they do X thing, but they also do X thing. That made no sense.
Calls and questions come up about what happens next, whether Joe Biden is, actually resigns or he doesn't. We just got to remember, nothing's going to change.
Whether he resigns or doesn't? This came out 14 minutes ago. Oh, resigns like as the president. They're talking about, if he doesn't want to run for a second term, that means that he's not eligible to be president, because they always have to have something to whine about. They can never. This is what I mean about, like, the conservative mind being one of perpetual whining and victimhood and doomering. They can never even celebrate a thing that has happened because their ideology is like liquid oxygen, in that you have to keep it under pressure for it to stay liquid. If conservatism is not under perceived pressure, it expands outward and it no longer makes any sense. It can't hold itself together. You need like the external threat. You need something to whine about. This is something distinct about conservatism, about reactionary ideology. Like, liberalism is actually perfectly capable of operating on the presumption that everything's fine. That's their default state. Liberals love talking about the world like it's the end of history, Oh, everything's fine. The arc of justice is long, but it bends towards, so on and so forth. It's too much their default, I would say. But for a conservative, they can never just say, like, oh, Joe Biden is dropping out. Now they have to be like, oh, well, that means he should also immediately resign the presidency.
Kamala Harris is the nominee or some other Democrat is the nominee. Nothing else is going to change. Joe Biden has been the figurehead for people behind the scenes who have been calling the shots. The same will happen if Kamala Harris is elected president or other Democrats. The fact is, we've got unelected power elite in Washington coming from
Another example of how unprincipled non-Marxist populism just turns into like theory devoid JQ posting. I don't want a I don't want a politician in office who's clearly beholden to the wealthy. Now here's a clip of Donald Trump explicitly saying we have to make life good for people like Elon Musk, who's providing him $45 million a month to win the presidency. Just out and about with it, you know? Why? It's not corrupt if the oligarchs and dictators are openly in charge rather than them simply being like a donor class behind the scenes.
The military-industrial complex, national security state, working with their friends in the big industrial propaganda media, they all just...
As opposed to, you know, Republicans who definitely don't have connections in the media, and Donald Trump, the guy who constantly brags about, like, expanding our military, definitely doesn't have any connections with the military-industrial complex. You kidding me? He talked about building an Iron Dome around America, which would cost more than the GDP of the world, you know? And who do you think's going to make the missiles for that Iron Dome? Ben and Jerry's
just want to stay in power, so they don't really actually care at all about Joe Biden. No matter how many crocodile tears they shed, they're going to look.
Incoherent talking point to jump from you know, Joe Biden and Kamala Harris won't be that different in the sense that they're both beholden to the interests of the wealthy. That is true, by the way. It's also true of Donald Trump and every other politician in a bourgeois democracy. That is true. You have very rare exceptions for people like, say, Bernie Sanders, who are principled enough that they very clearly are pushing against that tide. But Donald Trump is so openly pro-corruption that not really viable. But to jump from that to that's why the people crying on ABC News aren't sincere in their crying, meaningless. Drek. Trite.
Look for the best horse that they think will help them win and back that person.
Kamala is probably easier to manipulate than Joe Biden. At least Joe Biden knew who was who in Washington. Kamala's spring chicken. She's brand new in this scene. She does.
Your propaganda isn't even consistent. The whole line from the Republican Party is that Joe Biden is so senile that he just gets led around by anyone. Now you're like, oh, actually, oh, yeah, you know, Joe Biden's senility makes it easy to lead him around. You know what makes Kamala Harris easy to lead around? Her youth and virility. What? Just saying anything, man.
She doesn't know anybody. She doesn't know where it's coming from.
She is the vice president of the United States. She was a senator. And before that, she was the AG of California.
Did though. Remember on that debate? You tangled with Kamala. Let's watch this.
Senator Harris says she's proud of her record as a prosecutor and that she'll be a prosecutor president, but I'm deeply concerned about this record. There are too many examples to cite, but she put over 1,500 people in. Oh,
this was back when Tulsi Gabbard was pretending to be left-leaning. So this clip is going to be really funny because they're about to show Tulsi Gabbard criticize Kamala Harris for her record as an attorney general. And then they're going to cut back to where Tulsi Gabbard is now as a Fox News panelist, where everyone there is pro-cop, and they're going to pretend that this is an own from their perspective.
Jail for marijuana violations and then laughed about.
Oh, I'm sorry, Fox News, are you anti-jailing people for marijuana violations? You're all law and order.
About it when she was asked if she ever smoked marijuana. She blocked evidence. She blocked evidence that would have freed an innocent man from death row until the courts forced her to do so. She kept people in prison beyond their sentences to use them as cheap labor for the state of California. And she fought to keep cash bail system in place that impacts poor people in the worst kind of way.
Now we cut back to Fox News, where we are in favor of all of these things. Like literally on Fox News, they'll talk about how prisoners have it too good and we need to lock more people up and we need to build more private prisons and we need to double the number of police officers.
So Kamala's record's going to be...
Yeah, why would you show this to a Fox viewer? They're going to be like, wait, Kamala Harris wants to lock up black people who smoke marijuana? Well, hold on now.
Front and center. I don't know if she knows what's coming.
You know, the first thing that I think of when it comes
What
to
are they even
Kamala
saying?
Harris once again trying to stand on her record is our border. She was appointed the border czar, and it's almost like she felt as long as she said on television, hey, the border is secure, that somehow it would magically be secure. That wasn't the case. We've had an unprecedented number of people crossing our borders illegally as the Biden-Harris administration.
Why, like literally, why would you cut back to that clip from the 2020 primary debate if you're going to cut forward and be like, in addition to Kamala Harris being bad because she was overly zealous in policing, now we think she's bad because she's not arresting enough legal migrants. And it's like, what do you believe? You don't believe anything. The idea of like criticizing the ousting of Joe Biden for Kamala Harris is a matter of pragmatism when you clearly don't believe in anything outside of whatever lands points at that moment. The border czar thing is a Republican talking point. Well, yeah.
Administration's open border policy essentially aided and abetted these cartels in their multi-billion-dollar human trafficking industry, making our country far less safe. The list goes on and on about Kamala Harris's failures, even as vice president over these last 3.5 years, both here at home and her failed attempts at foreign policy that have made our country less safe and pushed us closer to the brink of war. So if she is the Democrats' nominee, she's got a...
Oh, man, they have nothing. Are you kidding me? We're going to go after Kamala Harris. Here's a clip from 4 years ago of her saying stuff we agree with. Okay. Also, we're going to vaguely gesture towards her policies on the border, something she didn't do and isn't responsible for. And also, many other things. Oh, yeah, dude. You can really tell why they're upset Joe Biden dropped out, why the Heritage Foundation is threatening the lawsuit, why Donald Trump is threatening to not debate. They're attacking Kamala Harris for banning plastic straws. Kamala Harris didn't ban plastic straws. She was the AG. Now, was Kamala Harris arresting people for using plastic straws? Yes, and many died in those gulags. But she didn't make that law. She was just following the law. She was just following orders.
A lot to be held to account for.
And the reason Joe Biden was able to even win was because he was supposed to be moderate. And there's no moderate with her. None. California socialist. She's a radical. It's not going to play in the rest of the...
She's a radical, but also we're going to try to convince you that she's bad from this 4-year-old clip of her being in favor of heavy policing, something we endorse, but we're criticizing her for being like us. But also she's different from the thing that we said. She's like a socialist, but she's also too far to the right on policing, which we agree with. But also she did the bad thing of being the border czar, which isn't a thing.
Country. That is very clear. Thank you so much, Tulsi Gabbard.
Yeah, you added so much. You added so much.